All right, I think we've managed to make that work. Well done,
Yeah,
Mike.
a few gremlins in the system there. I am so sorry that we're running 8 minutes late. Hopefully, you've stuck around to have a listen to us.
And if not, you can always patch the recording, right? So that's the beauty of these things. But welcome, everyone who has joined us or has
Mhm.
popped up on LinkedIn. I can see a few of you joining now. So welcome. And I believe there's quite a big audience across the world. So welcome wherever you're from. This is a Bailey and French live event. We're going to be building on the session that happened with Alex and Dane last time. So if you haven't caught that one, worth having a look at that after this one. We're going to be talking in a little bit more depth about human leadership and
Mhm.
applying its principles across the employee life cycle. But I guess quick introductions, because we're not Alex and Dave.
Yeah.
My name is Anthony. I'm part of the learning team here at Bailey and French.
And my name's Richard. I'm also in the learning team here at Bailey and French.
And those of you who have attended some of our webinars, you'll probably recognize our voices. But this way, you get to see us in a little bit more of a human context, right? So
It's been a while since our faces have been on something, but you might, recognize our voices. But it's good to put a face to it sometimes.
Absolutely, absolutely. So welcome. I've explained what we're going to go through. This is live. So if you hear some of the hustle and bustle of Brighton, please apologies. This is going to be recorded, as I've mentioned. You can catch it on LinkedIn. You can catch it on YouTube. You can catch it on any of our platforms. Our newsletter also will be going out very shortly. So there's plenty of ways to get in touch. We've got your questions on the board behind as well. So if you do want a specific question or you have any comments, please do that. We'll look out for it as we go. But otherwise, so human leadership. Let's just quickly recap some of the key points that Alex and Dane touched on. Why human leadership? What's its relevance right now? How does it relate to time to performance? How does it relate to all of those key things? Richard, what did you take away?
Well, gosh, we could spend all night just talking about the introduction to this. But yeah, human leadership, it to me and the people I'm speaking to, it's never been so important. So yes, we've always done leadership development and we've always done some training for leaders, and you can see those organizations that did it well, that actually implemented something compared to those that maybe just went, your line manager, go. But it doesn't always bring the human side to it. You get taught how to do a 1-to-1 or a 360 or write up goals, but you actually really learn how to be a leader rather than a manager, and those skills behind that. And particularly as I'm seeing with newer generations coming to the workforce, whether that's our generation, millennials, or the Gen Z in particular, they're looking for something different in their leaders. They want leaders that are authentic, that they can have a proper discussion with empathy, and then role model as well. They're coming and seeing these leaders burning out, and they don't want that. They want a work-life balance. They want their leaders to role model wellness and actually look after them, as that balance between the work life and the home life, it blurs more and more and more, not just working at home, but actually like living at the office.
It's so true, isn't it? The expectations of people have completely shifted. There's obviously all the digital side of things that's coming into the forefront. You know, how does human interact with tech and still maintain that human connection, whether it's on Teams or what have you. But also the business case and the numbers that we're being asked from CFOs, CEOs all the time, isn't it? It's, well, what's the numbers behind human leadership? And
No, the business case is so important, particularly to a lot of the customers that I speak to. But there is a lot behind that. Like, it's particularly if you're looking at leaders, that's impacting an entire organization. The business case is huge.
Yeah, and the costs of retention, the cost of rehiring, the costs are quite limitless in terms of well-being and burnout and productivity, the cost of kind of not conflicts, but maybe lack of efficiency in operations, the loss of customer loyalty, because we know the impact of lack of engagement to customer loyalty. And there's also the opportunity cost that you and I were talking about just before this.
Exactly. Imagine the cost of being left behind. Organizations are changing so quickly now. Technology is coming in, AI, that's changing everything, whether you want it to or not. And if you don't have leaders there that are looking after the people, that can move quickly and be agile, you're going to get left behind, and the costs become humongous.
Yeah, right. And we're seeing that with the war of ChatGPT and all of those companies. That's prime example. If you don't have the best people because you're not attracting the best people, if you're not living up to this greater expectation, you're going to get left behind real quick.
Yeah. And think of all the organizations and the industries, the cars that have been left behind by Tesla, and all of these, that suddenly new technologies come along, new ways of working. If you don't have the leaders there that can really implement that and drive their people and drive the performance, motivate the performance, which we'll come on to, then exactly, getting left behind.
Great plug. I love that. So let's talk Ben. Okay, that's human leadership. We've now explored why we're talking about it. Those of you that want to look back at Alex and Dane's sessions again, you can find that LinkedIn, YouTube, etc. They go into a little bit more detail on the business case. What we wanted to touch on today was the kind of employee life cycle, the talent life cycle. And we wanted to focus in on retention, performance, and recruitment. So starting at the first touch point, moving on into performance conversations, and then looking at retention, EDI, and those types of principles. We've not got long. So we will be doing a follow-up webinar on the detail of each of this. I'll be joined by my colleague Rob, and we're doing a learning week of webinars in May. So keep your eye out for the detail. And we're only going to touch on the high-level stuff. But let's start with recruitment.
Yes, and I think we've all been through situations where we haven't had that human element within our interview process, and that sometimes starts with filling out an application form, rewriting your CV 2 or 3 times I've had before, clicking numbers and filling out questionnaires before you even talk to a human. You're given a number, and I appreciate sometimes that's really important with ED&I, having your name taken away, having your whatever taken away so they don't know. That can really help, but you still need to bring a human side into it. And even when you are in front of then a real human being, sometimes doesn't have that human connection, does it? I think we've all had those interviews before where maybe the interviewer isn't engaged, whether they're on the phone, their emails, not really listening to you, or kind of the opposite of that, and you feel like you're walking into Dragon's Den or The Apprentice, and you feel beyond nervous, more scared than you realistically should be. Remember, you were saying earlier, recruitment is a two-way thing, and you should be going in there and interviewing them as much as possible. But some interviewers, they don't have that human element that takes it away from that. But it can make such a lasting impact on the potential employee that you're looking to recruit. I can actually think of a great example. It was actually when you recruited me to come to Bailey & French. I, without going into details, had a sickness bug on the day of the interview, and I cancelled quite last minute. And I was so convinced that would be the end of my recruitment process, because if you think about it, sickness bug, last minute, that sounds like a can't be asked, hungover, something's come up at work. I never expected to hear from you again. So I was really surprised when the recruiter called me a couple of days later to rearrange. And it was like it hadn't happened. It was acknowledged, moved on. Great. And I think that really set me up throughout the recruitment process, which had lots of other human elements as well. It wasn't just that. And really got me excited about working here.
Yeah. And I think you touched on a really important point. The first impression, whether that's the first click of a button, the language that's used on the application forms or the job specs, you know, is it human language? Is it inclusive language? Does it resonate kind of authenticity? Does when the hiring manager, when you meet them, when those circumstances come up, are people showing empathy? You know, you might have it on your wall as a value of the company, but if your hiring manager is not delivering on that,
I would like to see how many organizations could name their values, apart from maybe the HRD who wrote them. I would like to see how many could actually,
because it's got to be lived and breathed. And I think the candidate experience is no different in terms of keeping it human. And I know we'll touch on that, and the previous live session touched on what we mean by that and all the different elements. But I think it's a really, really important point. You touched on a really important piece around kind of balancing human though with making sure that we're still not removing bias, you know, making sure we are removing bias. How do we kind of get into that? How do we balance that? What are some of the examples that you might have seen?
Well, balancing human, well, yes, obviously there's always an element there. And I completely appreciate that when you're putting an application online, you need to do a tiny bit of screening first, because otherwise you're just going to be like to spam. It's not worth your time. But having elements around the organization, that the attraction parts, think about people coming into the workforce now, and people who've been in it a while. This isn't just Gen Z. They get numbered a lot, but it's not just them. People aren't necessarily looking for compensation or quirky perks. They're looking for the human elements of that, and that might come from Glassdoor. I think when you apply for a job, are you not checking Glassdoor? It's part of your checks and balance to look at an organization before you go in, and people on there are rating their leaders, what they're talking about them. It's not just the CEO who's got that percentage next to them of approval rating. People are really going on there, and that can really show up. And then all you're going to do is put off the best talent, the best people coming in with the organization.
Yeah, you're right. And obviously the transparency, I mean, rightly or wrongly, we know that Glassdoor has many a bias attached to it, right? In terms of people only want to go on there to complain. It's like TripAdvisor. But having said that, it's still the transparency lens, right? It's getting a view into the organization. So any way that you can enhance that, and I know lots of companies do it with videos and more human kind of case stories and stories of people's. I saw one the other day that was really catchy, and it was sharing the person's kind of personal journey from a career point of view. You know, I joined the organization, and this is how they developed me, not just in terms of my role as a salesperson or as a, you know, from a technical angle. This is how you invested in me as a human being. And this is not only just impacting my life, but it's impacting my family, it's impacting, you know, everything that I hold dear to myself inside and outside of work. And I thought that was powerful, that I'm not seeing that enough.
Yeah, I really enjoy those. It's a bit of almost a guilty pleasure. I watch those quite often. It's partly my research when I'm working with a new customer, obviously. But I've watched a lot of those videos, and some of them are atrocious. But it's probably, you're right, looking back on it, because they don't bring in that human side of it. They don't actually tell the story of the person behind it and the person coming in, so that you can actually relate and put yourself within that shoes.
Yeah, right. So candidate experience, telling us a human story as part of the attraction process, making sure that the hiring manager and the HRBP or whoever sat in that interview, you know, maybe even the first question needs to be a bit more inspiring. You know, what strengths do you bring to the table? What inspires you? What excites you inside, outside of work? Whatever that is, the recruitment process needs to be.
Being treated as a unique human being.
A unique human being.
Yes.
Well, we'll move on.
Yeah.
Right? Because we've touched on recruitment. Let's touch on performance, development, that kind of middle cycle. You know, you've got onboarded. We talked a lot about kind of time to performance in the first LinkedIn Live that we did with Alex and Dane. Tell me more. Performance.
Yeah, it's on the tip of a lot of tongues, I think is the way of putting it. So when I first joined the organization, we were just coming out of COVID. I think we finished lockdowns by then, maybe not. There was still stuff going on. So it was well-being. That's what everyone focused. How can we just help our people? How their resilience is shot. They don't know what they're coming or going. Well-being. Let's do this. And now we've moved out of that. We've got people in a better place. We're not there yet. There's a lot happening in the world. Really appreciate that. But now companies need to be efficient. They've overhired, looking at tech and some other industries. They now need efficiency. They now need performance. How are they actually going to get the best out of their people? Alex, our CEO, has said it's the year of the teams. And I've had a lot of other of my customers talking about performance. They don't really want to discuss anything else. Tell me about performance, or don't tell me anything at all.
What's the impact of this program on performance?
Yeah.
And it's a really difficult balance, because a lot of companies are wanting to make that change, but maybe leaders, people across the organization, not able to necessarily have those more difficult conversations because they're worried about the impact on retention, the impact on well-being. And they kind of spent so much time invested in well-being champion. How do you sort of start to make that shift, balancing performance and well-being?
Well, that's the point, isn't it? And that's what we bang on about all the time, is you've got to manage that performance with that well-being, because otherwise it's not sustainable. We can come in and do all the work and do all the workshops and speak to lots of people. If there isn't that balance there, all you're going to drive people to do is burn out or overperform and then lose their engagement or quiet quitting or whatever it's called now. And it won't last. So that's the traditional way, is that you come in, big impact. This is based on someone doing 100-meter sprints. This is how you do performance. But then you're doing a 9 to 5 or probably more hours than that. How do you do that day in, day out when you've got everything else happening at home?
I've never understood that high performance model because it just doesn't apply to human beings with a life. You know, picking up kids, doing everything outside of life that matters so much. You're not doing the, 4 days a week training, maybe a couple of hours a day, and then match day on Saturday. You're doing match day every single day. It's an interesting one.
And it goes on and on and on. But so how do you actually balance that as one sort of unit, which is obviously where I mentioned earlier about motivating performance rather than managing it.
And I think that's a really nice subtle spin because we're trying to, and this is where human leadership comes in, right? To be human is creating that environment that the team can support each other's well-being. There's psychological safety, but there's also psychological bravery in the team. Support each other at all points, right?
And I think psychological safety and trust and empathy is so important. I was speaking to, I think it was a law firm. They were worried, partners were worried after all this well-being, after everything they've done, really great stuff. Partners said, well, no, I can't tell my staff off anymore. I can't tell the associates off when they've done something wrong. And you're like, you've missed the point. That isn't what we're getting at. You still have to have difficult conversations. We're still a workforce. It's still a commercial business. Still needs to make profit and shareholders and everything happy. We get that 100%. But it doesn't mean that you can't go in there and have empathy within that, where you can't be authentic, why you can't put yourself in that situation, understand why that has happened, why you're cross, why it hasn't happened the way you wanted it to happen, and then do something that's actually going to be an action to move on from that.
And then this is why I don't like the term human resource, because just simply that label means that you're almost trying to tap into the talent that's within someone. It's like you're trying to extract something from them, and actually what should be happening, and human leadership is focused on this, and human leadership is at all levels, right? Across the team, being authentic, being inclusive, having all of those skills around role modeling creates the environment that people want to and are inspired to turn up, giving their best every day, and we're also recognizing that not everyone can turn up their 100% best all of the time, but as long as you as a team are managing that.
Exactly, and that's often a misconception where we talk about well-being traditionally or human leadership. People think, well, that means that we're taking away authority, or we're taking away leadership or purpose or direction. No, we're looking at actually what motivates people, what their strengths are, how you can get the most out of people, rather than just saying, this is how it's done, do it this way. Managing performance. Well, no, you motivate performance by actually looking at that person as a unique human being.
And I think regardless of whether you've got rating systems, regardless of what you're trying to do around creating more regular conversations, no matter what the process looks like and how much you try to simplify, and I know many people that are watching this are probably doing that process either right now or going through the appraisal classic process. It's March, it's April, people are going through this right now. The fundamental is, are your people approaching those conversations with with curiosity, with authenticity, with vulnerability? Are they sharing their own plans and development plans going into the new year? All of those things are crucial, I think.
Yes, no, exactly. Because you can do all the training as you want about how to have a difficult conversation. That doesn't really actually change anything, does it? It's more about the authenticity, the role modeling, that human connection that's actually going to be able to have a good leader and have someone that's admired, looked after, who can mentor, who can actually drive the performance within their team.
I was actually working with a client the other day wanting kind of honest conversations, right? So not difficult conversations, it's honest conversations.
Yes, very right.
Because if you frame it in a positive way, and this is where I love the world that we work in, right? Positive psychology and the impact, even of those subtle language shifts, will help leaders. I'm being flagged by Mike to move on, which is fantastic. So thank you. Final point is around retention.
Yeah, we've already covered it, kind of.
We really have.
We've looked at it through another lens, where if you don't do all this stuff, what's going to happen? Because who stays in a job for their whole life now? I work with a lot with insurance, financial services, and their tenureship of the I'm going to say old generation. I've just said it. I'm not insulting. People who have been in the organization for a while, they have 10, 20, 30 years, their entire working life. That's not normal anymore, unfortunately, or fortunately. People job hunt, particularly when you look at newer jobs, software engineers. I'm talking now pre all of the redundancies, but the average tenureship was less than 2 years. Because they get bored, they move on to another project, and that was just normal. But how do you actually retain those people and keep those people? Because I've heard of stories of in the old days of them being given crazy salaries just because they wanted to keep them so they didn't go to a competitor. They didn't even need them themselves. They just didn't want them to go to a competitor because obviously they're going to take all the knowledge with them.
That's expensive.
It is, and as we've seen, that isn't going to be a thing anymore at all. Right. Everyone's streamlining, everyone's looking at performance, everyone's looking at ways they can be more efficient with their cash, making profit, which some companies just don't do. So how do you actually drive retention then? How do you keep those people who have so much knowledge from going to your competitor? How do you actually keep them when maybe even compensation doesn't mean as much, when the perks have all got a bit boring because they're now working at home, so a free lunch or an on-site gym or whatever it is just doesn't actually appeal to them anymore.
Doesn't cut mustard. It's an interesting one because you're absolutely right. Rather than focusing on those gimmicky things, let's focus back on the fundamental human element. You know, are the pillars of performance and motivation being met? Are people respected? Do they have clarity on their role and why they were picked and how their unique brilliance can be applied in that role? Do they have an understanding of their unique strengths and how to kind of tap into that? And are they being utilized in various projects across the organization for those amazing strengths that they have? All of these really fundamental things, are we monitoring them, measuring them and using the data? Or are we just going, oh, I know what we can do. We can put in an employee assistance program. I don't know.
You're exactly right, and there's a lot of other risks to it that we haven't even touched on. That you could spend one of these sessions just going through, like ED&I. If you can't do anything for retention, you can't really sort out your inclusivity. If you want more exclusive diversity within a organization, because every metric seems to say that that's a good thing. If you have different people from different ethnic backgrounds or different economic backgrounds or whatever it be, you're going to have more ideas, you're going to have a better understanding of the world. But if you can't hold on to your staff because you're not treating them like humans, you're probably going to really impact some of these things more than other groups.
It's really interesting. I was at a conference last week and everyone's probably heard about that if you haven't.
What, you in America?
I don't know whether people know. We were talking about the kind of employer value proposition.
Yes.
And touching on EDI. And we were talking about, well, exactly that. If you're spending all this money and attention, quite rightly, trying to increase the availability of talent, you know, more women in tech, more women in leadership roles, you know, a whole raft of EDI issues, right? But then you're bringing them into a culture that isn't ready. And we were talking a lot about how exit interviews are really important for those, you know, really delving into and really being open and curious in those exit interviews, but then making sure that you're doing something with it.
That's the point that always annoys me. With basically everything, you get all this data, you do all these psychometrics, you get great stuff from exit interviews, and it's just, what happens to it? Someone's probably left soon after with the knowledge in their head, and it's in some notes that never get reread.
Yeah, right. And it's so important. And what was really interesting, actually, we were looking at the importance of boomeranging. So even though you might have left because of any circumstance, right? You might have hated your boss at the time, and most people leave their boss or their team, they don't leave the organization. So if you can continuously learn and create that culture, every chance that they might come back, and that investment, that early investment of getting different diverse backgrounds, as you say, into the organization, it might just be beneficial for the industry and people might come back, right? It's vital.
Yeah, I think traditionally it was seen as a bit of a weird thing, wasn't it? Going back to your previous employer, particularly if you've had a bit of a gap, sorry. I would see it as quite a compliment. If someone's left for whatever reason and then they're coming back to you, it kind of shows, you know, we had it right, that we are looking at the people that they know what they're coming into, but they're still coming back. It's a compliment.
Yeah, I think so, and I think more companies can do even more. And I think, you know, when you look at retention, the cost of retention would go increasingly down, right? And that actually you're then getting more people come back to the organization with a whole load of wealth and experience in a different diverse background than what you had them in the first place. It's a little secondment.
Yeah, they've gone off and they've learned some new things. They've got some new ideas. They've discovered new people.
For sure. So belonging, feeling included, all of those things really, really important to retention. Love that. And human leadership is key because it's about inclusive behaviors. It's about being authentic, not having to turn up to work with that mask on, which is incredibly draining.
No, it is, and I'm very fortunate that I can naturally be very authentic at work. It's not an issue for me, but I know I'm in a very special position with that, where there's lots of other people who code switch or they don't feel like they can be themselves within an organization. But if you have a leader who's inclusive, it's a different color.
For sure. And I promise you, I haven't paid him to say that. I promise you.
Yes.
It is a special feeling at Bailey & French, and I know we're growing and we're going through all of these challenges in a way, right? So retention, performance, well-being, balancing human role modeling. You know, how can we go out to our customers and talk about humanizing the world of work if we're not living and breathing that every day? And I think our team do a wonderful job. I'm sure we've still got a long way to go, but it's nice to hear some of the stories. So thanks for sharing. I think we're going to wrap up. I think there's a few questions that were coming through, but I think we've touched on a few of them. I'm just double checking because I haven't looked. So fantastic. We've pretty much covered all of them, but if you've got any specific questions for us afterwards, if you want to engage with the recording that will be sent out, please do. We'll interact with you and answer all your questions. We've also mentioned things, certain reports, statistics. There was a cool one earlier around Gen Z and retention.
There's a lot of really great stuff on that from it's a Deloitte survey. It's Gen Z and millennial.
That's it. And
I think it's more about Gen Z, but because I am a millennial. But yeah, it makes you think in a different way.
Right.
They're just different things that are wanted now from the workforce than the people who joined just before us.
Right. And actually still those fundamentals around career, flexibility, and having that really authentic, inspiring leader that I can trust and
I really like that when people don't always leave organizations because of the company. Obviously they do sometimes, but I think a lot of the time it is down to a leader. And there's so many times that you can recall a good leader or a bad leader just like that on top of your head.
For sure. So all of that and more. We've got more webinars coming up. April 27th, also May, I think it's around the 15th, 16th. So keep interacting with us. We'd love to hear your questions. If you've got particular topics, or maybe you don't agree with human leadership, maybe you are one of those people who are going, I need to see some more stats. I need to feel some more stuff. Please send it. And we'd love to interact. We'd love to run a session. We should do like a misconceptions or debunking the myths.
No, exactly, because everything that we do is research-based. There's surveys, there's models, there's theories. And we can back it all up. So we're not just going on and on about our own opinions. These are things that are tried and tested.
A lot of research has gone into it, as you say. If you've got any questions, if you're wanting, more information, your HR team is looking at building human leadership into the strategy for 2024. Are we on?
23 to 24. Yeah. Gosh.
If you're looking at all of those things, you want our help, you want some intro sessions, or you want us to talk to your team, share some of the evidence-based research. I'm going to be doing an event summary as well from the conference that I've mentioned a couple of times. So please reach out to us. Thank you for joining today. I hope you enjoy the recording, those of you who were doing that. Richard, thank you.
No, thank you. The only thing you didn't mention was strengths. So we've mentioned strengths briefly a little bit, but it underpins a lot of what we do, getting the most out of people, making people happier, driving performance sustainably with well-being. But we run a strengths discovery session every Tuesday, 12 o'clock. You can, our LinkedIn will be all over it. If not, just drop us a message and we'll come back to you about that. But it'll be great to see you on there. I do some of them as well. I'm lucky enough to do those. It's a really great introduction to strengths, or a refresher if you've done a bit in the past.
Perfect reminder. Thank you, because I had forgotten that. Thank you, everyone. See you soon.
Thanks very much.